We often treat patience as this kind of moral high ground. And in many cases it is, right? To, to pause instead of to press, right? To wait instead of to demand. To offer space instead of pressure. That's not just kind, it's often necessary for love to breathe and for connections to emerge naturally. Patience can feel like one of those highest of forms of respect. But there's also a shadow side that I don't think we talk about enough. Because sometimes what we're calling patience may actually just be avoidance in disguise. And avoidance, unlike patience, isn't rooted in strength, it's really rooted in fear. This episode is about that razor thin edge between the two, where I'm just giving it time starts to sound more like I'm too scared to show up, where I'm waiting for the right moment becomes I'm hoping that this moment will pass so I don't have to be vulnerable. And the people on the other side of that kind of waiting, they feel it. They feel the wall, the distance, the lack of movement, not as safety, but as a form of rejection. Sometimes it's even worse than rejection. It's like punishment wrapped up in silence. The truth is, we don't give enough credit to how painful it is to be kept in limbo by someone's so-called patience. Because when patience becomes withholding, it doesn't just delay intimacy, it actually prevents it. So let's get honest. Let's talk about the kind of waiting that helps us to grow and the kind that also helps us to hide. Let's look at the emotional gymnastics that we sometimes do to convince ourselves that we're being good or respectful when really we're just too afraid to face what we're feeling. And let's also finally name what happens when patience becomes this excuse to stay safe while someone else is left spinning in confusion and pain. So we begin with the person who's waiting, right, for someone else. Not waiting with trust or peace, but waiting with uncertainty, with heartache. And you've likely been there. You've opened up to someone, you've shared a part of yourself, maybe even taken like a really big risk emotionally, and then you heard nothing back. And days go by, maybe even weeks, and they tell you that they're processing, they need time, they're just trying to be patient with themselves. And of course that's fair. I mean, everyone really deserves space to figure out what it is they're feeling. But then there's also a difference between needing space to reflect and using this space to disappear. See, when someone asks for time but gives no return date, no emotional anchor, no warmth or clarity, what they're giving isn't just space, it's exile. And you're not waiting with them, you're waiting for them in silence with no idea if they'll ever come back. And here's the hard part. They still get to feel like the good one, right? Because they're being patient, but they're being patient because they don't want to hurt anyone, because they're just not ready. And they may genuinely actually believe that they're being kind, but intention doesn't always equal impact though. And the impact of this kind of withholding, it's loneliness, it's confusion, it's this pain of holding on to hope without anything solid to really stand on. And you start questioning everything. Did I say too much? Was I too intense? Are they ghosting me slowly under this guise of maturity? And so you feel like emotionally stranded, and worse, you feel like guilty for wanting more clarity, as if asking for it would make you the impatient one. And that's the trap, right? See, we idolize patience so much that we forget to notice when it starts doing some damage. Now, flip the script though. What if you're the one who's doing the waiting, right? You're not trying to hurt anyone, you're just trying to be careful, to not move too fast, to not make promises that you're not sure you can keep. But deep down, you know it's not just patience that's holding you back, it's in reality it's fear. Maybe, maybe you're afraid of being misunderstood. Maybe you're just still figuring things out with your own feelings and you're too scared to speak them out loud. And maybe you're so used to being self-contained that the idea of letting someone in, even someone kind and open and warm, feels like a risk that you don't know really how to take. And so you wait. And you don't text back right away. You delay the phone call, you leave the message unread, and you tell yourself you just need space. And you probably do. But is space really helping you move closer to what's true? Or is it really helping you delay the moment that you'll have to face? Because that's the difference, I think. Patience, like real patience, it really moves towards clarity, more clarity. And avoidance moves away from clarity. Patience says, I care about this too much to rush it. Avoidance says, I care about this too much to risk losing it, so I'll just keep it on pause forever. And in that indefinite pause, the other person suffers. Now, maybe you're not being cruel. Maybe you're not even conscious of what you're doing. But emotional withholding, like intentional or not, it still leaves wounds. It's the silence that stings more than an answer does. And it's the absence that really feels louder than words do. And it's this in-between that starts to rot something beautiful from the inside out. Because most of us can handle a no. We can handle disappointments. We can even handle endings when they come with clarity and with care. But what we struggle to survive is really the slow fade. The waiting without answers, the ghosting in a suit and tie called I'm just being careful. And here's what makes it so complex. Sometimes waiting is the right thing. Sometimes we really aren't ready. Sometimes like rushing in would only lead to more pain later. But the virtue of patience only holds its value if it includes honesty. See, if we're delaying and being transparent about that delay, what that delay means, fine. If we're slowing down with someone, not just dragging them behind us into this emotional limbo, good. Like there's an old saying, silence is a form of speech. But when it comes to relationships, especially ones that are trying to grow, silence can be deafening. And it speaks volumes. It's not always about malice, but about fear, about discomfort, about someone who hasn't learned how to face their own emotional edge without running from it. And we need to start acknowledging that silence is not always gentle, because sometimes it's also a form of power. Not intentional, but it's a quiet kind of a control. See, when you delay responding, when you hold back clarity, when you keep people dangling in uncertainty, you hold the emotional upper hand. You get time, you get distance, you get to process at your own pace. But the other person, well, they get anxiety. They get stuck replaying the last conversation on repeat. They get the sick feeling of wondering if they're carrying too much. And they get shamed for wanting a resolution. And worst of all, they often blame themselves because we've told people it's noble to wait, right? We've romanticized giving space so much that we forget that space without contact isn't kindness. It's often abandonment. It's a kind of abandonment that doesn't even look like abandonment, which makes it even harder to name and harder to heal from. Now, let's bring in another layer, shall we? Spiritual or therapeutic justification. This one hits deep because in many growth-oriented communities, we're taught to sit with discomfort, to honor our process, to not force resolution. And it's all good advice until it becomes a shield. We start using inner work language to really excuse outer disconnection. And we say that we're listening to our intuition when really we're avoiding a hard conversation. And we say that we're respecting boundaries when in reality we're just scared of being honest about our disinterest, our uncertainty, our fears. And we say we're not ready, but we never clarify what being ready would even look like. And it's that vagueness that isn't neutral. It relieves the other person spinning in their stories, unsure whether to hold on or to let go. And it creates this kind of purgatory where no one can actually breathe. And here's the hard truth of this. Our emotional healing doesn't really exempt us from accountability. Yes, you're allowed to take time. Yes, you're allowed to move at your own pace. But if someone is tethered to that timeline without their consent, that's not empowerment, that's manipulation. Often unconscious, but it's harmful nonetheless. See, avoidance dressed up in spiritual language is still avoidance. And it can be some of the most isolating kind of behavior that we unknowingly participate in. But let's get even more personal, shall we? Because for many of us, patience has become our coping strategy, and that happened so long ago for us. We learned it in childhood when we were waiting for an emotionally unavailable parent to just come around. And we learned it in adolescence, waiting for that friend or crush to finally see our worth. We learned it in early adulthood when we were waiting for someone to stop stringing us along and finally commit. And so we got good at waiting. We got too good, in fact. And we in essence confused endurance with love. We thought that loyalty meant staying, even when staying starts to erode our self-worth. And because we normalized that kind of waiting, we stopped realizing that we even had a choice. We stopped realizing that our time, our energy, our attention, all of it is sacred. That we don't just owe people endless patience, especially what they're giving us in return is in silence and ambiguity or vague promises of someday. There's a deep grief that comes when we finally admit that someone's waiting is not really rooted in care, but more so in avoidance. And it's even deeper when we recognize ourselves as the ones who are doing it. Because suddenly we're not just dealing with the disappointment, we're actually facing the possibility that we might be the reason that someone else is feeling unseen. We might be the one who's withheld when we need to give more clarity. And we might have meant well, but really we're causing harm anyway. And it's that realization that really stings and humbles and also opens up a doorway to, with awareness, show up differently. To name when we're scared instead of stalling. To say, I'm not ready, but I don't want to keep you waiting, right? To release people from the grip of indecision. I think that is what integrity really looks like. It's not perfect certainty, but it's honest presence. And it's also what intimacy looks like. Not just offering love, but also offering clarity. Because love without clarity is a maze. It keeps people walking in circles, hoping that the next turn will actually lead to some openness. But when the walls are built from silence, your silence, all they ever hit is more confusion. So what does it look like to transform patience into presence? It starts with checking in on your motives. Are you giving space for the relationship, or are you just using space to protect yourself from the relationship? See, that distinction, it changes everything. And then check in on your communication. Have you told the other person what's going on in your head? Or are you just letting them guess? Have you perhaps offered timelines or anchors or emotional handholds? Or are you just keeping it vague? See, if you truly don't know what you want, say that. Let your ambiguity be honest, and don't mask it in false hope. Say, listen, I care about you and I don't know what I'm ready for yet with you. I want to be honest about that so that you're not really left wondering. That one sentence might be the difference between someone feeling tortured by silence or feeling held in truth. Because it's not the waiting that hurts the most. It's the not knowing, the lack of a story, the absence of context. See, we can hold a lot of hard things if we're not doing it alone. But if we're kept in the dark, even the kindest intentions can feel a lot like cruelty. There's something uniquely painful about being asked to just be patient when what we really need is direction. And when we bring our vulnerability to someone, our hope and our longing, our emotional skin peel back, and they respond with a shrug that says, not yet, or maybe someday, we tell ourselves we have to wait, right? Because we're told that good people wait. But what if good wasn't warped into silence? What if we're not actually being noble? We're just afraid to walk away? Because somewhere inside, we've really equated someone's uncertainty with a challenge. If I can just be patient enough, then they'll choose me eventually, right? And that belief becomes a trap. It turns our currency, our time into currency where we're just waiting one day at a time. And every day we don't get the clarity we are craving, we double down on our investments to wait. It's like this emotional equivalent of sunk cost fallacy. I waited this long, so I really can't stop now. And that's where the pain even intensifies. Not because the other person's cruel, but because we've decided that our endurance is proof of our worth. And so we stay, we suffer, we stretch, and they take the space that we give them. Not maliciously, not intentionally, but they're still benefiting from us erasing ourselves. And this is where we need to make a shift, not towards blame, but towards truth. So let's talk a little bit about emotional pacing. See, everyone processes at a different rhythm. That's real and that's valid. But relationships are not these solo journeys, right? When we're walking with someone, we don't just get to stop on the trail and say, I'll catch up when I'm ready, right? Because while you're pausing, the other person is still moving. They're trying to match your energy. They're trying to be fair. They're trying to figure out how to not rush, but also not to abandon themselves. And that's the tightrope. How do I honor someone's process without sacrificing my own? And that's why waiting needs boundaries. That's why timelines are healthy. And that's why let's check in again in 2 weeks is a gift and not really a pressure tactic. Because when time stretches indefinitely, our nervous systems really go haywire. See, we weren't designed to live in limbo. We were designed for stories, with arcs, with turning points, with resolution. And when someone denies us the next chapter, we get stuck flipping the same page over and over, hoping the ending might somehow change. That's not growth, that's really paralysis. So what does emotional maturity look like in these moments? It looks like naming your limits without guilt. It looks like saying, I want this to work, but I need some sense of where we're heading, right? It looks like clarifying, are you waiting because you genuinely don't know? Or because you're hoping that I'll fade away on my own? See, that kind of clarity, that takes courage and guts, right? Because the answers, they may sting. But without asking, we keep living with these assumptions. And assumptions can breed false hope. And they can also breed resentment. Because every time we tell ourselves to wait and the other person doesn't really show up, we're chipping away at our self-respect. And soon the resentment isn't even just towards them. That resentment also turns inward, and we start hating ourselves for being too patient and too forgiving and too soft. We look in the mirror and we don't recognize the version of ourselves that really tolerated so much vagueness just so that we can feel close to someone who wouldn't really name what they wanted. See, that's not compassion, that's compromise. Compromise with our own boundaries. And there's a misconception that patience is always passive, right? But real patience is actually quite active. It requires communication, it requires presence, it requires shared understanding. It says, let's slow down together. And that's not the same as, don't talk to me while I figure things out for myself. Give me time is not the same as saying, disappear until I'm ready. And that nuance matters. Because the former says, we're in this together, even if we don't know what's going on or we're unsure. Whereas the latter one says, you're on your own until I feel safe. And that distinction is everything. Because waiting in connection builds intimacy, but waiting in silence builds insecurity. And if we keep mistaking one for the other, we'll keep mislabeling our emotional pain as virtue. We'll keep calling abandonment grace. And we'll keep calling confusion patience. And we'll keep feeling depleted in relationships that never really asked us to show up fully, just to hold space while the other person decided if they wanted to or not. Now let's talk about something that's rarely addressed, and that's the person who's doing the withholding. Because if that's been you, this, again, let me remind you, it's not about shame, it's about awareness. So I want you to ask yourself, am I withholding because I'm scared of hurting them? Am I waiting because I'm genuinely unsure, or is it because I don't want to confront what I already know about what's going on? Am I letting them stay hopeful because I feel too guilty to close the door? If any of those are true, hear me on this, if you would, please. Kindness without clarity is cruelty in slow motion. You don't have to have all the answers, but if you know that someone is waiting for something from you that you can't give, name it. That naming, that's integrity. And that ownership, that's intimacy. Because when you acknowledge your limits out loud, you're offering them freedom. Freedom to grieve, freedom to let go, freedom to choose their next steps with full awareness. And yes, it might sting. But honestly, that sting is still better than silence that erodes. See, there's a quiet liberation in choosing clarity over fantasy. Not because clarity always brings joy, but more so because it brings truth. And in truth, we can finally actually grieve. Not just the person, not just the relationship, but also the version of ourselves that we kept waiting and kept hoping and kept showing up for, hoping that door was going to open. We can actually mourn who we were when we believe that waiting would be rewarded. And we can honor the vulnerability and the tenderness inside of us that believed that if we were good enough, kind enough, patient enough, someone would finally, eventually see us. And once we've grieved, that's when the rebuilding happens. Because real love, the kind that's rooted in integrity and intimacy, it doesn't just ask you to wait without communication. It doesn't ask you to guess what it needs or to suppress what you're feeling. It doesn't even stretch time like a test of see how far you are going to go for the crumbs. No, it really shows up, even when it's unsure, even when it's messy. It says, I don't have it all figured out, but I care enough about you that I'm gonna name that. And I care enough about us to be honest. And that honesty, no matter how uncertain it is really a lifeline. Because it means someone is choosing connection over control. They're not using ambiguity to keep you around. They're actually using truth to build something real. Even if it means the relationship changes. Even if it means there may be a parting of ways. Because sometimes walking away is an act of love. Not out of bitterness, not out of ego, but out of respect for yourself and for what that connection was supposed to feel like. Here's something else to remember. You're not weak for hoping. You're not foolish for being patient. You are doing what you were taught to believe was noble. And you were trying to make space for someone else's process. That's a beautiful act. But now maybe it's time to make space for our own healing. Maybe it's time now for us to choose movement over stillness and peace over pretense. To let the silence between wait and maybe be filled in our voice again. A voice that says, I'm not going to be the placeholder. I'm not a test of endurance. I'm not a silent agreement to put my life on hold so that someone else can be comfortable at my expense. No. We can say that we are alive now and we have needs. And we're going to honor our timing and refuse to lose ourselves in the midst of it. That's not pressure. That's self-respect. So, what does it actually look like in real life to move from passive waiting to active clarity? It might sound something like this. I respect where you are and I care about you, but this indefinite space is painful for me. Or I'm not really asking for promises, I'm just asking for communication. Or I need to know what you're truly available for, not what you're hoping might eventually happen. And it might involve setting a date to revisit that conversation. It might actually involve saying, if you're still in limbo by this time next month, I'm gonna need to step away. It might involve recognizing the pattern that's been replaying in your life, where you're always the one who's waiting and hoping and stretching yourself and choosing to interrupt that pattern with something different, something courageous and brave, like saying no, like walking away, like grieving what could have been so that you can make space for what could still be, with someone who doesn't need to be coaxed into choosing you. Because this isn't just about romance. This is about family members who keep you on emotional hold, or friends who only reach out when it's convenient. It's about colleagues who dangle opportunities with no follow-through. And this is about anyone in your life who benefits from your patience, but never reciprocates with clarity. And the pain isn't just about the waiting. It's also about being alone in the waiting. It's about watching your loyalty stretch thin while the other person is guarding their options. See, it's not a shared relationship. That's an emotional monopoly. And the only way to stop playing that game is to stop stop really hoping that it will become something that it never promised to be. Integrity says, I can honor your pace. But then intimacy also adds, only if it honors my pace as well. See, when both are present, waiting becomes a bridge. And when only one is present, waiting becomes this cliff. Our leads, it can lead to deeper connection. So if you found yourself on that cliff, where your arms are tired from holding on, and your heart is tired for hanging on, you're allowed to let go. not because you gave up, but more so because you remembered that your love isn't earned through sacrifice alone. It's actually built through reciprocity and through truce, through timing that doesn't cost you your peace. See, you deserve to be with people who don't just ask you to wait, but who also invite you to walk with them. People who can also name their feelings and not just hint at them. People who don't actually hide their doubts behind vague delays. People who say, here's where I'm at right now, but let's navigate through this together. And that kind of love, that's worth being patient for. But until it arrives, I'd say don't settle for silence that's dressed up as grace. And don't confuse withholding with wisdom. And don't forget, choosing your own clarity is never the wrong call. It actually might be the bravest thing that you ever choose to do. I hope this has served you well. Let me know in the comments how this hit you. See you in the next episode.